Charleston, 1851. The wealthiest quarter of the city is cloaked in silence. Too much silence. 9 of the city's most powerful men, plantation owners and financiers, vanish without a trace in a single night. Their homes are left in disarray, overturned glasses of brandy, doors flung open, the scent of damp earth trailing through polished hallways. The city wakes to whispers, but no bodies, no explanation. Some say it was bandits. Others insist it was God's judgment. But beneath the polite murmur of Charleston's aristocracy, fear spreads. Because a single name lingers like a curse, Solomon. The official story buried this event, rewritten in court records, erased in church archives. But slave families carried the truth in hushed oral whispers for generations. They tell of Solomon, a man sold too many times, beaten too many nights, until he rose not with violence in the open, but with patience, cunning, and a hunger deeper than any wound. They say Solomon learned the earth itself could obey him. And on that night in Charleston, the earth opened. The masters never escaped. They were not killed quickly. They were buried alive, deep beneath the city's cobblestones, their screams pressed into the soil. This is not a ghost story. It is a history scrubbed clean, a testimony silenced by fear. Tonight we return to the lost records of Charleston. We unearth Solomon's revenge. In the antebellum years, Charleston projected elegance, marble churches, crowded marketplaces, the scent of magnolia drifting over streets of cobblestone. Tourists described refinement, gentility, charm, but that was a mask. Beneath it beat a heart built on chains. More than half the city's population were enslaved Africans, traded, whipped, and broken to maintain the polished mask of aristocracy. In parlors, white men spoke of honor and God, while their wealth was soaked in blood. Behind kitchen walls, in fields, in orphanages for mulatto children, an underworld of suffering breathed. Charleston was no jewel. It was a graveyard disguised as a ballroom. The churches told enslaved people that suffering was holy. Ministers preached submission from pulpits, urging patience for freedom in heaven, not earth. And still in secret, enslaved families carried something else. Fragments of African ritual, whispers of old powers tied to the land. It was here, in the swamp's breath and the earth's damp silence, that Solomon began to listen. 9 masters. 9 men bound by the arrogance of Charleston's ruling class. But no one could have predicted the horror Solomon would bring, or that their polished city would one day bury its own in silence. Solomon did not appear remarkable. He was quiet, obedient when watched, deliberately invisible. Born in bondage on a rice plantation outside Charleston, he was sold at age 12, then again at 15, and again at 22, 9 sales in total, each marked with scars. By the time he reached the city, he had mastered the art of silence. But silence is not absence. Those who knew him whispered that he remembered everything, every master's cruelty, every name, every scar. Solomon carried them like stones in his body. He studied men the way one studies weather, knowing when storms would break. He worked in cellars, digging, moving earth, repairing foundations beneath Charleston's grand houses. This was no accident. The masters believed it fitting labor for a man of strength but no wit. What they did not know was that Solomon felt the earth differently. He could hear shifts no one else heard. He pressed his hand into dirt and swore it hummed. Neighbors remembered him standing barefoot in gardens at night, palms pressed to the soil as if listening to a secret beneath the roots. Children said the ground seemed to soften where he walked. And when rats or snakes disappeared, some whispered it was Solomon who drew them into the dark. In Charleston, the powerful prided themselves on noticing everything. Yet Solomon walked in their shadows, building a plan they would never see until the night they vanished into the ground. Charleston in the late 1840s was unstable. Slave revolts had been suppressed with brutality, but the fear lingered. Laws grew stricter, chains tighter. The ruling class built their lives on vigilance. Yet in their obsession with rebellion in the open, they overlooked rebellion in silence. The 9 men who would vanish were not random. They were bound together by greed, arrogance, and cruelty. Each had owned Solomon at some point in his life. Each had scarred him. They thought they had erased him with sales and beatings, reducing him to property shuffled like coin. But Solomon remembered. The storm gathered slowly. Records from plantations described strange accidents. A collapsed barn, a drowned overseer, a fire that burned without wind. Rumors followed Solomon, but no proof ever surfaced. To the masters he was a useful shadow, too invisible to matter. And so, on the night of their disappearance, the men did not hesitate when invited to a private gathering, a meeting in a cellar. Disguised as business, cloaked in secrecy, they did not imagine the ground beneath them was already hollowed. Waiting, Charleston would awaken to empty houses, but Solomon had already prepared the earth. The vanished men were not merely landowners. They were Charleston's hidden dynasty, judges, financiers, plantation heirs, and merchants bound by secret agreements. Their wealth controlled city politics, and their cruelty extended beyond their plantations into churches and orphanages. Where their word was law, one ran an orphanage for enslaved children, children fathered by men who denied their blood. Another operated a secret trade in bodies, shipping men and women downriver in chains, their cries echoing in night fog. Another was known for his experiments, chaining people in swamps to test endurance. They met not as friends, but as allies in domination, each upholding the city's mask of civility. Yet beneath the mask, they were predators who believed themselves untouchable. But Solomon remembered. He carried their names like carved stone tablets inside him. Each man had struck him, broken him, or sold him. 9 names, 9 graves waiting. History books erased their disappearance. Newspapers claimed unknown sickness, or vanishing due to financial ruin. But whispers in Charleston's alleys insisted otherwise. The 9 men had been taken underground, screaming by the very earth they once owned. The night began like any other. The 9 gathered in a cellar beneath a merchant's house, one of Charleston's oldest structures. Wine flowed, cigars smoked, and plans for profit laced their words. But Solomon had been there first. By day, he had prepared the cellar. He dug through old foundations, hollowing cavities in the earth, leaving soil that trembled under weight. He smeared the walls with mixtures of ash, blood, and salt. The air grew heavy, like a lung filling with damp breath. No one noticed. When the men gathered, Solomon remained silent at the door. Some sneered at his presence. "The boy has no tongue," one said. But Solomon's silence was not submission. It was invocation. Witnesses later claimed strange things. Glasses trembling though no one touched them. Candles flaring and dying. The air thick with rot. Solomon stepped back and the ground shifted. At first a soft groan like the earth sighing. Then a crack. The floor opened. The 9 men lunged to escape, but the cellar walls betrayed them, sliding inward with soil. Hands clawed at stone, fingernails breaking. Solomon did not move. He only watched. One by one, the men were dragged downward, buried alive. Their screams muffled by dirt, prayers swallowed by soil. Solomon whispered one word, "Remember," as the last voice was silenced beneath the ground. At dawn, Charleston stirred. Servants found mansions unlocked, fires burned to ash, chairs overturned. But the masters were gone. No struggle, no blood, just absence. The city's ruling families panicked. Rumors spread like disease. Some whispered that bandits had struck. Others that rival merchants arranged an assassination. Ministers proclaimed judgment from God, but enslaved people said nothing aloud. In whispers, in kitchens, in fields, they shared one name: Solomon. Authorities searched for bodies. They tore up gardens, dredged rivers, ripped apart walls, nothing. The ground seemed untouched. The 9 had vanished into silence. But Charleston could not afford to admit the truth. Wealth depended on stability, on the illusion of control. And so newspapers fabricated stories. Sudden illness, mysterious voyages, bankruptcies. Death certificates were forged. Records erased, but the earth remembers. In some basements, people swore they heard pounding beneath the floor at night. Soft at first, then violent, then gone. Others claimed they saw Solomon standing in alleys, staring, barefoot, his palms black with dirt. Charleston's polished mask cracked. Fear spread, and yet Solomon was nowhere to be found. The churches responded with sermons of terror. Ministers thundered from pulpits that demons had claimed the 9, that Charleston's sins had reached heaven. Congregations wept, slaves were whipped harder, and prayers filled the air like smoke. But something deeper unsettled the clergy. They whispered of old African rites, rituals tied to soil, to ancestors. to the silence of graves. In private, ministers admitted a fear they could not confess aloud, that Solomon had awakened something older than Charleston, older than America itself. Some churches sealed their basements with stone, fearing the ground would open beneath their pews. Others burned entire sections of land, claiming to purify the soil. But the fear did not fade. In orphanages, children began drawing crude pictures of men buried underground, their hands reaching upward. Women cleaning pews swore they saw cracks in the floor, shifting like something pushed from beneath. The city's leaders demanded silence. No sermons of Solomon were allowed. No records of the vanished were permitted. Fear became denial. Denial became history. But in the swamps and quarters, a different truth circulated. Solomon had not killed the masters. He had imprisoned them. Their souls still clawed beneath Charleston's foundations, screaming in earth only he could command. For decades, no official document mentioned the vanished nine. Families forged genealogies to pretend their ancestors had died naturally, erasing the disgrace. The story slipped into silence. But in 1912, a forgotten ledger surfaced in a seminary archive. A priest had written of a night when the soil consumed men whole. He described hearing voices through the church floor, low, muffled, suffocating prayers. He warned that Charleston was cursed, built on unquiet ground. The ledger vanished shortly after discovery. The seminary declared it a forgery, but whispers spread among students who had read fragments. The line lingered in memory. They were not buried to die. They were buried to remember. Folklorists who traveled through Charleston in the 1930s recorded fragments of the tale from former slaves' descendants. They spoke of Solomon as neither man nor ghost, but as the soil's keeper. Some claimed he still walked the swamps, barefoot, his skin coated in mud, listening for names whispered in the earth. Official Charleston history remained silent. But silence does not erase truth. Silence only buries it deeper. In 1948, a construction crew repairing an old Charleston street broke through a layer of soil. Beneath it lay fragments of bone, shackles, and a collapsed cellar no one had documented. Workers swore they heard groans before the earth caved in. City officials ordered silence. Records disappeared. The ground was filled and paved, but the rumor spread. Solomon's graves had been disturbed. In the weeks that followed, people reported visions, shadows moving beneath cobblestones, cracks forming in walls, whispers of voices calling from drains. Children playing in alleys said the ground felt soft like breathing. Dogs refused to walk certain streets. An elderly woman, descendant of Solomon's kin, told journalists that the ground will not hold forever. Solomon promised it would remember. She was silenced, called senile, ignored. But some began to believe the truth. Solomon was not gone. He had become part of the city itself, waiting for Charleston to dig too deep, to forget too thoroughly, to let arrogance rise again. And when it did, the earth would open once more. By the mid-20th century, Charleston had polished its image into a tourist city of charm. Carriage rides, colonial homes, polished facades. But beneath the cobblestones, fear pulsed. Old families refused to discuss their ancestors. Cemeteries bore names of the vanished men, but their graves were empty, monuments to nothing. Children whispered dares to one another. Press your ear to the ground at night, and you'll hear scratching. Some swore they felt hands pushing up beneath the soil. Others said the earth grew warm where Solomon had walked. Yet Charleston's rulers clung to silence. Historical societies buried documents, churches scrubbed records. Professors dismissed the legend as superstition. But denial only made the story more dangerous, because whispers traveled through bloodlines. Descendants of enslaved families spoke quietly of Solomon's promise, that he had bound the nine to the earth forever. Their screams would never end, their punishment never ease. Charleston lived with a curse it dared not name, and in that silence Solomon's shadow deepened. In 1963, during urban renewal projects, workers digging near East Bay Street uncovered something unusual, a tunnel-like structure beneath a ruined foundation. The air that rushed out was rancid, heavy with decay. Inside were collapsed stones, charred wood, and scratches deep in the rock, as if made by desperate hands. One worker fled, babbling about voices in the dark. Another swore he saw a skeletal hand pushing upward before crumbling into dust. Officials ordered the site sealed, calling it unstable. But not before one photograph was taken, a blurred image of a cellar wall, marked with 9 names carved into stone. Each name matched a member of Charleston's vanished dynasty. The photograph was confiscated, dismissed as forgery, but rumors persisted. It seemed the graves had not been forgotten. The city had tried to bury the truth again, but the earth refused to stay silent. Solomon's curse lingered, festering beneath Charleston's polished mask. Among the descendants of enslaved families, Solomon became more than a man. He became symbol, memory, warning. They told stories in whispers. If a master beat his slaves, Solomon would one day take him. If a family denied their blood, Solomon would remember. Folklore described him as barefoot, cloaked in mud, carrying chains that rattled without end. Some claimed he appeared in dreams, standing at the foot of beds, soil dripping from his hands. His message was always the same. The earth remembers. Unlike other tales of revenge, Solomon's story was not about release. It was about confinement, forever burial, voices never silenced but never freed. A justice that was endless, suffocating. For the oppressed, it was both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because the punishment had no end. Comforting because it proved the masters did not escape. Their power was broken. Their eternity was soil and screams. And through Solomon, Charleston's hidden past would never vanish completely. Whispers connected Solomon's vengeance to an orphanage once run by one of the 9 masters. Officially, it was for mulatto children, many fathered by men who disowned them. But hidden records suggested the orphanage was also a place of cruelty. Children disappeared, sold quietly to plantations far inland. When the master who ran the orphanage vanished, his building decayed. In the 1920s, workers demolishing the structure uncovered small skeletons buried beneath the floor. The city silenced the discovery, calling it animal remains. But neighbors swore otherwise. They spoke of children's cries heard at night, of windows rattling though no wind blew. They said Solomon had taken the master not only for his cruelty to him, but for his cruelty to blood that should have been protected. The orphanage ruins were eventually paved over, but locals still avoid the site. Mothers warn their children, "Do not play there, for the ground still weeps." In 1974, a priest at a Charleston seminary confessed to hearing something under the chapel floor. At night, when alone in prayer, he described low pounding from beneath, followed by muffled voices reciting prayers in broken Latin, as though trapped in soil. He wrote, "They do not ask for salvation. They beg for air." The priest was silenced, sent away for illness of the mind. His notes were hidden, but fragments resurfaced years later. They revealed his terror. He believed Solomon's act had not only trapped the 9 men, but corrupted the very ground of Charleston. That every prayer uttered above soil was poisoned, echoing against the buried. His writings warned of something worse, that if the earth cracked again, it would not only release screams, it would release vengeance spreading like rot. In 1989, Charleston was struck by an earthquake. Buildings collapsed, streets split, fear spread. Amid the chaos, witnesses reported something strange, voices rising from cracks in the ground. Emergency crews swore they heard moans beneath rubble, though no bodies were found. Some claimed to see faces in the soil, half-formed, screaming before fading back into the ground. Others reported barefoot footprints in mud, though no one walked there. For a brief moment, it seemed Solomon's graves had opened. But just as quickly, silence returned. Authorities dismissed the stories as hysteria. Yet survivors knew better. They believed the quake had disturbed the prison below, reminding Charleston that the buried 9 were still there, waiting. The earthquake passed. Charleston rebuilt. But some claimed the city had not repaired itself. It had only sealed over wounds it dared not acknowledge. The descendants of the 9 men still live in Charleston, though most deny the legend. Wealth was preserved through lies and false records, their ancestors' sins erased. They fund churches, own land, appear in society's photographs. But behind closed doors, some admit a curse. They speak of nightmares passed through generations, dreams of suffocating in dirt, of clawing endlessly at walls, of hearing Solomon's voice whispering, "The earth remembers." A few families keep basements sealed with stone, fearing the ground will crack. Some avoid Charleston's oldest streets entirely. Others cling to denial, insisting the story is myth. Yet every generation has one or two who break, who swear the soil itself follows them, cracking at their steps. They say the curse is not only tied to Charleston, it is tied to blood. Today, Charleston markets itself as a city of charm, of history tours and Southern grace. Tour guides speak of pirates, wars, and ghosts, but they do not speak of Solomon. His story lingers in shadows, whispered only in alleyways, kitchens, and the unrecorded spaces of memory. Yet visitors claim strange encounters. Tourists pressing hands to old walls swear they feel warmth, as though something breathes beneath stone. Some hear whispers in drains like muffled chanting. Others return home with nightmares of being buried alive. The city refuses to acknowledge it, but Solomon's shadow stretches long. His act was not a single night. It was a wound carved into the earth itself. Charleston walks upon it daily, never knowing when it will open again. The story of Solomon is not simply revenge. It is warning. For every city that buries its sins, for every family that silences its shame, for every church that scrubs its corruption, the earth waits. Because the ground does not forget. Blood seeps deep and memory is heavier than stone. Charleston buried its truth beneath cobblestones, but whispers rise like smoke. And those who listen hear Solomon's words. Remember, this warning stretches beyond Charleston, beyond one night in 1851. It is a truth about history itself. What we bury never dies. It festers. It breathes. It waits. Imagine pressing your ear to Charleston's soil at midnight. The city sleeps. Carriages roll. Tourists laugh. But beneath it, faint, almost inaudible, you hear scratching. A muffled voice. Then another. Then 9. They do not scream now. They whisper. Not prayers, not pleas, but a sound like soil sliding into lungs. A sound of endless suffocation. And somewhere among the roots and shadows a figure moves. Barefoot, silent, listening. His palms press against the ground as if soothing it, reminding it of its duty. His eyes lift to you, and though he says nothing, you hear the word clearly in your mind. The earth remembers. The screen fades to black. The soil closes, and the silence returns.